Dan Rather in New York with Vicki Mabry near Waco with an update on the 51-day standoff outside Waco, Texas. Early this morning, armored vehicles entered cult leader David Koresh's compound and began punching large holes in the walls. Koresh and about 90 of his followers are believed to be inside. So far this morning, one man is believed to have left the compound, all others believed to be still in it. It is not clear, however, exactly what is going on or has been going on. About 45 minutes ago, one of the federal agents' tanks punched a hole in the front door of the compound. Earlier, agents jumped out of the back of another armored vehicle and began tossing tear gas into what appears to be an underground bunker where most of the cult members are believed to be holed up. The wind is up outside the compound and much of the gas apparently was dispersed. Right now, you're looking at a live picture from outside the compound. About all that can be seen is damage done by the tanks and other armored vehicles. The FBI says it'll hold a news conference in about a half hour. CBS News will be standing by for further developments, and of course, there'll be a complete wrap-up on your local news and on tonight's CBS Evening News. For now, with Vicki Mabry near Waco, I'm Dan Rather in New York.
This has been a CBS News Special Report.
This is a CBS News Special Report. John Roberts at the CBS News headquarters in New York. Some 6 hours after the FBI launched an operation trying to bring the 51-day-old standoff at the Branch Davidian cult compound just outside Waco, Texas to an end, the compound has been enveloped in smoke and flame. Vicki Mabry has been standing by in Waco, Texas for the entire duration of the standoff. She joins us now live. Vicki, what can you tell us about this fire?
John, just about 5 minutes ago, we saw tanks continuing to batter the compound, continuing to put gaping holes into the walls of the structure. We saw what looked like white, wispy smoke coming out, which usually is indicative of tear gas. The FBI has told us that they are using non-lethal tear gas to try to flush cult members out. And then suddenly, out of one of the second-floor windows, flames burst forth. And as you can see, it looks like at this point like the entire compound is just engulfed in flames. This all started at about 5:30, quarter to 6 this morning, when negotiators called second in command Steve Schneider and told him that if people did not come out, they were going to start pumping in that tear gas. About a half hour later, when no one came out, the tanks began to batter the compound, starting first with just the window, moving on to the front door, moving to other walls, pulling out entire sections of the walls. And as they made those holes, they began pumping in the tear gas, pumping it in further and further. That, as I said, started at about 6 o'clock this morning. It is now noon our time, and the entire compound has just now gone up in flames. We are trying to wait for the fire department to come. FBI sources have said that they were prepared with ambulances. They were ready to medevac out all 95 cult members they believe are still inside should they be injured, but we don't know if they were prepared for this type of action at all.
Vicki, in one of the close-up pictures we saw as you were speaking, we saw at least one cult member coming out of the front door of the compound. Obviously, this was not part of the FBI operation, the FBI plan.
This is definitely not part. We just got finished with the morning briefing about an hour and a half ago. They said what they were making these holes for is to pump in that tear gas. They said they were not trying systematically to tear the building down, but they were going to tear down farther portions of it and try to push the cult members into a central area that they could then make a really concerted effort to pump the tear gas in and try to force them out. But certainly a fire was not part of their plans at all.
Vicki, shortly before the fire started, as you mentioned, we saw one of those T-60 tanks with its snout pointed inside the building, putting tear gas into the area, as it has been doing for the past 6 hours. Is there any word on whether or not the fire was somehow connected with that tear gas operation?
John, we absolutely don't know if it's connected with the tear gas operation or if it has something to do with what cult members possibly are doing inside. FBI told us during the morning briefing that they were fired upon heavily by cult members each time one of the tanks would make an assault on the building. They said 12 to 15 rounds would be fired at them every time that happened. We don't know what the cult members are doing inside, so we have no way of knowing if it was something the FBI did or something cult members did that started this tragic fire.
Is there any movement, Vicki, among federal authorities to get close to the building to try to help out in potential rescue operations at this time?
At this time there would have to be, but John, from our position, we're about 1.5 miles away, and from our position we can't tell right now exactly what's going on.
Vicki, this might be asking you for a little bit of speculation, but is there a possibility that the fire was set from within? Perhaps the Branch Davidians saying, we're not coming out, we're going to burn the place down?
That is possible, and I am told that there are no signs at this point of any people coming out of the building. We have cameras that face several sides of this huge compound. It sits on 77 acres. We have cameras on several sides, and we see no people at this time making any move to come out of the compound.
Vicki, as I said, while you were speaking with us, we had a close-up of the front door area of the Branch Davidian compound. We saw what appeared to be one cult member leaving the compound. We have reports that another one has jumped from the roof. That could potentially be the same person. 95 people believed to be inside this building, 17 of those 95 people children. Some 37 people have left the compound since the standoff began 51 days ago. And we seem to see people in this picture, Vicki, which is about 2 miles behind you, I would imagine,
yes,
standing around in front of the building. There appears to be, those are agents that have made their way to the front of the building?
Most likely those are agents, and the one we believe who jumped from the roof was an agent. We believe that federal agents had made their way onto the roof of the compound.
Is there any sign of any firefighting equipment at this point? How long is it expected to take to get there?
At this point, we have not seen any firefighting equipment on the scene. Don't know how long. It should come up this road. There really are only 2 or 3 roads that lead up to E Ranch Road, which is the road that the compound is on. We have not seen anyone come past here at this checkpoint.
Vicki,
I don't know if they're coming in other sides, but really there should be someone coming through this way. At this point, with the magnitude of this fire, they need to be surrounding the compound on all sides.
Vicki, briefly, if you could, bring us up to date on the events that led to this morning's operation.
There are a number of helicopters coming in, and John, I'm sorry, I did not hear your question.
I said briefly, if you could, Vicki, could you bring us up to date on the events that led to the operation this morning?
What has happened, we understand, is that during the entire 51 days of this siege, FBI agents have been sending plans to Washington. They were non-specific about where in Washington, but naturally to their superiors at the FBI and also at the Department of Justice. They say that their plans were not vetoed. That may be a matter of semantics. Their plans were not accepted, so they had to wait and continue the negotiations as David Koresh and his followers continue to stall and continue to put them off. Finally, sources tell us over the weekend, Attorney General Janet Reno agreed that firing tear gas in there in non-lethal doses that would still be safe for the children inside would be an acceptable plan. They decided to go ahead with that operation this morning. They said if there was rain, it would be called off. There is no rain, as you can see. It's a beautiful sunny day. They went ahead with the operation beginning just before 6 o'clock this morning, and now it's turned into a tragedy.
Vicki, throughout this 51-day siege, we seem to have seen David Koresh engaging in a number of delaying tactics. First of all, it was give me access to the radio, then I'll allow some people to leave. Then it was after Passover, the siege will be over. He was in the middle of writing his interpretation of the 7 seals. Did the FBI just see that as being another delaying tactic and said it was time to try to bring this to an end?
Yes, they did see that as just another stalling tactic. As you said, March 2nd, he said, if you play my 58-minute tape on national radio, then I will come out. On March 19th, he said, oh, just give me a few more days. We're planning to come out. We'll surrender peacefully. Then he wanted to see an attorney. He and Steve Schneider wanted to see attorneys. The attorneys were allowed to go in. As a matter of fact, they were the only outsiders allowed to go inside the compound and talk with them face to face. That went on for 5 days, 1 week. And now today we are told in the briefing that David Koresh and Steve Schneider said, well, basically that really was just a delaying tactic. After that, it was Passover. The attorney said they believed that they would come out after Passover. Once Passover was nearing the end, David Koresh and Steve Schneider said, we never had any agreement that we were coming out at the end of Passover, and we want to write our interpretation of the 7 seals. David Koresh then told federal agents that he was working on those 7 seals, that he had taken 3 full days and nights writing just the first seal. Federal agents say you have to keep in mind that David Koresh is a 9th grade dropout. He says he doesn't write very well. He wanted Steve Schneider's wife to type each part of this manuscript. He wanted Steve Schneider to edit each part, and Steve Schneider said this morning he had not even started on the editing of the first seal. So federal agents had joked, kind of half jokingly, half seriously. They had said at this rate it could be 5 to 6 months before this is done. Finally they got the confirmation, they got the go-ahead from Washington to go in with the tear gas and the tanks that would batter the compound.
Vicki, at the regular FBI briefing just outside of Waco this morning, Special Agent Rick said that this was going to be another waiting game today, but a waiting game engineered by the FBI. They believed that the Branch Davidians had gas masks, which would allow them to remain immune from the tear gas for a period of up to 8 hours. They were prepared to wait it out. They said that they were not assaulting the building. Obviously, something has gone very wrong.
They continued to stress that they were not assaulting the building, but they continued, even as he was speaking, to push gaping holes in it. And just probably about a half hour ago, we noticed that one entire side of the compound had been completely demolished. Now, they say that this compound is very poorly constructed. Cult members actually built the compound themselves. It's built out of wood. I imagine with the strength of these tanks, it does not take very much. If you're trying just to poke a very concentrated hole in it, I'm sure it does not take very much for a wooden building to be completely toppled by an Army tank.
And Vicki, obviously by the pictures that we could see of the compound, it has gone up in flames quite rapidly, indicating perhaps that the construction was fairly open inside. Again, we want to repeat that there are 95 people believed to be inside that compound, 17 of them children. Vicki, we heard Special Agent Ricks this morning in his morning briefing say that he believed that there was some underground lattice work underneath the compound, perhaps as small as crawl spaces. We see in the picture, I should point out, a man walking out of the compound with his hands over his head. Is there a possibility, Vicki, that some of the people inside the compound are actually underground in shelters and may not be in the thick of things as we see this compound burning down?
There is, as you said, one person who has come out with his hands up, and there is a possibility. Agent Rick said it is like a basement, but mostly it is like a crawl space. But supposedly, cult members have been using this underground area for target training. So it is possible that some of them have gone down underneath, but with the construction of these buildings, it's going to collapse in on the crawl space or basement, no matter how deep it is. So that is not a safe area for them to be at all.
Vicki, is there any assessment by the FBI as to what the cache of weapons inside the compound is and whether there is the possibility of explosions that might be connected with this fire?
One of the things that got the ATF started on an investigation of this was that a box being shipped to the compound by UPS broke open, and inside they found hand grenades, and allegedly UPS alerted ATF that there were hand grenades going there. Now, federal agents say that they know that the Branch Davidians have at least $100,000 worth of weapons inside. Most of them, they believe, purchased legally, but also some converter kits purchased that change semi-automatic weapons into fully automatic weapons, which are illegal. And one of the things they've been very, very concerned with throughout these long 51 days is that the entire crime scene is being altered, which would include those weapons being reconverted back to their legal form, thereby destroying part of the evidence in this case.
Just want to point out that in the foreground of the picture that you're seeing, just behind the bus, we saw a man walking out with his hands over his head. There he is again. He appeared to stoop down for a moment, perhaps try to surrender to federal agents who are quite near the compound. There he is walking up to the back of what I believe to be a Bradley fighting vehicle being taken into custody by federal authorities. Vicki, at the beginning of this siege, David Koresh was boasting, saying, don't send in armored personnel carriers, don't send in armored vehicles. We have the weaponry here that would knock a Bradley fighting vehicle 50 feet into the air. Is there a worry at this time that some of that ordnance might be contained within the compound and might lead to an even further escalation of the fire that we see in this picture?
Absolutely, and of course it's entirely possible that that is what has caused the fire already. And ATF agents who were involved in that initial firefight say that they did hear this type of sounds associated with extremely heavy weaponry, perhaps 50 caliber machine guns. And ATF does know from some of the autopsies and some of the shrapnel that was removed from some of the injured agents, they do know that some of those injuries were caused by hand grenades. So it's entirely possible that it is the weapons that are inside that are causing the fire. At this point, we just don't know. We
appear to see what I believe is a federal agent dragging somebody across the ground just in front of that Volkswagen van in front of the CEV, the combat engineering vehicle. We do not know if that is a cult member or if it perhaps is a federal agent.
Or if it were perhaps as an agent. We don't know at this point.
Perhaps might have succumbed somehow to the smoke or the fire. The FBI was very clear this morning, Vicki, in saying that it was using CS tear gas, a non-lethal form of tear gas that was being pumped in by the CEVs and the M60s, and that they were not using the pyrotechnic form of tear gas. Is there a possibility that that would rule out completely this fire being started by the tear gassing operation?
John, at this point, it's just so very hard to say what has caused the fire, and it's also hard to determine what exactly they are using. It's become clear over the course of these 51 days that David Koresh and his followers still have batteries inside. They have battery-powered radios. They listen to the press briefings. So a lot of times, the things that are said in the press briefings are intended somewhat to inform the press, but also very much to speak to David Koresh as another means instead of just negotiating with him over the phone. But some days they were just very, very belligerent about his attitude, hoping, I think, that they would anger him. Other days they were very kind and very conciliatory in the way they talked to him. So it's really hard to tell. I hate to say if they're telling the truth, but it's hard to tell if all of the information is getting out to the public and to the press.
For those of you just joining us as we cross the half hour, this is a CBS News Special Report. Just to reiterate what has happened about 6 hours after the FBI began an operation at the Branch Davidian compound, a tear gassing operation designed to try to bring out the cult members. Over the course of a number of hours, suddenly a fire has broken out. The entire Branch Davidian compound is being consumed by flames and smoke. Vicki Maybury, who has been waiting out this standoff with cult leader David Koresh, the FBI, and the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Department, is joining us live via satellite from Waco, Texas. And Vicki, we just wanted to say that apparently fire trucks are on their way. They have been dispatched. They have to travel some 10 miles to the compound, but it appears at this point as though when they get there, there is not going to be much left of the Branch Davidian compound.
Not going to be much left, John, and the other problem is there is not running water up there. There are no fire hydrants up there. Cult members have been using wells and a pumping system that pulls the water up, and then they bring it into the house quite often by buckets. This is not going to be fighting a fire the way you would do it in, say, an urban area where there is a fire hydrant on every corner. That's just going to make the job even tougher once they do get here.
Again, just some information to pass along to our viewers. Since this standoff began at the end of February, some 95 people have stayed with their leader, David Koresh. At least 17 of those people are children. Some 37 people have left the Branch Davidian compound over the course of this siege. This morning at about 5:55 Central Time, the FBI and Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms began a tear gassing operation. They were sending in CEVs, those are combat engineering vehicles, M60 tanks, and Bradley fighting vehicles, to try to douse the entire compound, to saturate the inside of it with tear gas. CS tear gas is how the FBI described it, a non-lethal, non-pyrotechnic form of tear gas. It's not the same type of gas that you have seen in riot control in countries like South Korea, where an officer would fire an incendiary device at a crowd. It would then explode and start sending off the gas. This was just gas that was being pumped from the snout of vehicles that was being poked into holes that they had breached in the Branch Davidian compound. So they had tried that operation for some 6 hours. They had gone back again at about 1 o'clock Eastern time, 12 o'clock Central time for another go at trying to saturate the inside of the compound. Shortly after that, white smoke was seen appearing from the roof ridge in the central part of the building, just above the front door. It was believed at that time that it might be just tear gas that had been escaping. Then suddenly from one of the second floor windows, flames started to erupt. Within about, there we see the pictures of the initial fire getting underway. The smoke was coming from the roof line there. You see it breaching a second floor window. Within minutes after that, the entire central part of the Branch Davidian compound was in flames. And within about 5 minutes after that, it appeared as though the entire compound itself had been engulfed. We have no word on the state of the 95 people inside. We have seen 2 or 3 people come out of the compound, one person being dragged across the ground by what appeared to be a federal agent about 5 minutes ago. However, no confirmation on whether or not that was a Branch Davidian member or if it potentially was a federal agent who was injured in the fire and all the smoke that is going on there in Texas. Vicki Maybury, who is joining us live from the compound, she has been there for the past 51 days. Any sign of emergency vehicles at this point?
John, this road is still very quiet, but we have seen a series of cars go by with flashing lights on. Inside, we believe were heavily armed ATF agents and possibly some emergency medical assistance. We also see the helicopters that have been flying over for several days, all the way during this entire standoff. The helicopters have been practicing. They said they've been practicing runs from the compound to several hospitals in the Waco area. We have seen them leaving the area. We have not seen them coming in and have not seen them landing and picking up anyone.
Bulletin from the White House at this hour. A White House spokesperson says that they do not know what is happening at the cult compound. They do not know what caused the fire. They have seen the pictures, but they have no further information. And as you can imagine, FBI agents and ATF agents on the scene are probably wondering exactly what happened. Our correspondents on the scene have not got any confirmation as to how the fire started. So at this point, everybody appears to be in the dark as to whether or not this fire was caused by the tear gassing operation or if it was deliberately set inside by Branch Davidian members. Vicki Maybury, I know there wasn't a lot of contact with David Koresh other than his request to write his interpretation of the 7 seals of the book of Revelation shortly before this FBI operation took place. Is there any word on what his state of mind has been in the last couple of days?
No word on what his state of mind has been in the last couple of days, but I can tell you what it's been like, what agents say it has been like over the course of this entire standoff. They say they start out almost every conversation, they say, with references to biblical texts, and they finally have been able to try to get him away from that. They said sometimes he is very belligerent and very hostile on the phone. Other times they have said that he has been seemingly nearly in tears talking about what a terrible childhood he had and how everyone else had a better life than he did, but then he would wind it up by saying, but that's okay because I'm the Lamb of God and I am the one who holds the key to the 7 seals and it's all, you know, in his hands at this point. They say yesterday, one of the things they did during the day was to clear away all of the debris and all of the old cars from in front of the compound, and we believe that was in preparation for the operation today. One car that they had left there in particular was a souped-up black Camaro that seems to be David Koresh's pride and joy. Finally, yesterday on day 50, they cleared that car away, and they say he was absolutely the most violent on the phone that they have ever heard him. And they do say that he has on many occasions used 4-letter words which FBI said did not sound very godlike to them.
When the FBI was in contact with the Branch Davidian this morning, they had said that they were going to launch the operation, that they started about 7 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. At that point, Vicki, we had heard that the Branch Davidian member that they had been talking to, Mr. Schneider, was extremely upset about the tone of the conversation, extremely upset about the scope and the tactics of the FBI operation, slammed down the phone, refused to talk to anybody. It seemed that as during the operation, at least, the phone connection between the Branch Davidian compound and the FBI was cut. About 8 o'clock, a little after that Eastern time, we saw a banner being hung out of the window saying, "We want our phone back again." Does the FBI have any idea as to whether or not the Branch Davidian wanted to resume negotiations in this?
John, just a minute. Let me interrupt you because right now we do have a whole convoy of emergency vehicles coming up this road leading up there. This looks like probably the fire chief and fire marshals, and we have at this point 2 fire engines headed by. That was 2 emergency vehicles preceded by what looked like 2 fire chiefs' cars. I can tell you that we also have more coming up the road in just a minute.
Again, back to what we were talking about before we saw the fire apparatus go by, was there any word from the FBI that the Branch Davidian members were prepared to resume negotiations, asking that their phone service be restored?
What they said was when they first called in and said, okay, if you don't come out, we're going to start pumping tear gas in there. They said Steve Schneider immediately slammed down the phone, and in fact, they believe what he did was throw the phone out of the front door, and they think that may have severed the lines. After the tank started to batter the building and the tear gas started coming in, he did, as you say, got more emergency apparatus coming in, including at this point, that was 2 additional fire trucks, that is followed by an ambulance, and that is followed by another police car coming in, following up this convoy. I'm looking down the road now, and at this point, we don't see any more.
Vicki, I know that you have been on the air with us since this fire broke out, but are there any reports coming to you from our producers there in Waco, Texas, as to how many people have come out, whether or not the FBI has taken people into custody? We saw one picture where it seemed as though one person was surrendering. Do we know if that's all that has come out, or have there been more?
As far as we can tell, I am told that one person came out with his hands up, and that, as you said, there was another person who appeared to be dragged. We don't know still if that was a federal agent or if that was a member of the cult.
We should point out to you that in Washington, a spokesperson for the FBI says they do not believe that any incendiary devices were used in this tear gassing operation. Special Agent Ricks, in his morning briefing earlier today, made a special point of saying that they were using a non-pyrotechnic form of tear gas, a form of tear gas that did not have to burn to ignite and then create the gas. They were using gas from canisters that were mounted on the snouts of the CEVs, the combat engineering vehicles, and the T-60 tanks. They were poking holes into the Branch Davidian compound. As we seem to have learned in the course of this day, the compound itself, which was built by cult members, was not tremendously constructed. So every time those tanks would go into the side of the walls, they would take out gaping holes as opposed to just poking in a little hole. But the tear gas that they were using was called CS tear gas. It is a non-lethal, non-pyrotechnic form of tear gas. So a spokesman for the FBI in Washington says, as far as they know, no incendiary devices were being used during this operation, which may indicate that the fire was not started by this tear gassing operation, but perhaps by a Branch Davidian cult member inside. As Dan Rather always points out during these situations, what is just as important as what we know is what we do not know. At this point, we do not know how the fire was started. All we do know is that there were 95 people believed to be inside the Branch Davidian compound. 17 of those people are children, and this is one of the reasons why, Vicki Mabry, the FBI has not moved until this point.
Yes, and someone asked in one of the briefings probably about a week ago, they said when ATF first went there on the initial raid, they knew that there were 38 children inside. Now, during the first week or two, 21 of those children were released and were put into foster homes. But the question is, why did ATF go in knowing there were 38 children? And why has the FBI held off so long now that there are 17 children? The answer that we were given by federal agents is that ATF had planned and thought that they could completely secure everyone inside. They thought that they knew where the children were, they knew where the women were, they knew where the men were, they knew where the weapons were inside of there. They thought they would be able to go in, get the women and children into a safe spot, get the weapons sequestered in one area, get the men sequestered in another area. They certainly did not plan for this raid to go down the way it did. So the FBI, being concerned, they say, about the safety of the 17 children that David Koresh would not allow to come come out, had decided that they were going to take the tactic of trying to negotiate, trying to wait them out, trying to see if maybe their water would run out, if maybe their food would run out. But maybe we should talk about the food and the water now. We have heard that the Branch Davidians had stockpiled the food and the water, and that David Koresh has been saying he's been preparing for Armageddon since 1985, that he expected something like this was going to happen one day. He laid in supplies, we are told, of MREs, the military ready-to-eat meals. He also, we know, went shopping at the Sam's Club in town, where we have been told the Branch Davidians would spend $6,000 or $7,000 a month, and that they shopped at a food co-op where they bought several $100s a month worth of food. So apparently they have large supplies of food inside. As for the water, as I said, they have wells. Occasionally we would catch glimpses of people coming out. Perhaps they were going to the wells, or perhaps they have an elaborate pump system inside so they could still get the water in. But we do know that each time it would rain, there would be people coming to the window with cups and with pots, trying to reach outside and gather the water in. So it's really hard to tell how long they could have outlasted the FBI, but the FBI says they were finally becoming very concerned about the psychological damage of the bright lights at night, the sounds being pumped into the compound all night long, and just what danger the children could be inside. And also some former cult members who have since left and appeared on different TV shows have said that there were suicide plans made in there. David Koresh has steadfastly denied that each and every time the FBI has asked about that, but former cult members say yes, they were told how to commit a mass suicide. So there was concern about the children, and at this point it appears that the compound is just burning almost completely to the ground, with really, as we've seen, only one person coming out, and that one person was not a child. So at this point it's very hard to tell how the children are doing inside there.
We see another figure in the foreground of our picture, the lower right-hand side of your screen, a person waving. It appears to be a federal agent who was involved in what was a quick response rescue operation, perhaps calling over some more help, perhaps directing in the firefighting apparatus that has been brought in from about 10 miles away. We have word from Washington now that a White House spokesperson says the Justice Department has confirmed, and we do not know how they have confirmed this at this point, that cult members set the fire that is consuming the compound near Waco. Seeing as how Vicki Mabry, the credo of the Branch Davidian cult, was preparing for the end of the world, and that it has been said many times in the past 51 days that David Koresh and his followers have been seeking some kind of confrontation, is it any surprise that when push came to shove on the FBI side, that the Branch Davidian might do something like this, burn down their own compound, take the house down all around them?
No, it does not seem surprising when you listen to what the FBI has said every single day in every news conference when they talk about the suicide pact, when they talk about the fact that he says the end of the world is coming and that he holds the key to the 7 seals, and that once he opens that 7th seal, that will be the end of the world. FBI agents have also said that what they really believe is that David Koresh, in the end, is going to save himself. But they're quoted one day as saying, they believe he thinks it would be a marvelous accomplishment if he got a lot of his followers killed, if a lot of them died in what he would call the Armageddon. But they said they truly believe that he really is a very egotistical person, and that in the end he would want to save himself. So if we believe what the FBI has told us about David Koresh, and it's very hard to tell since we have no phone communication with him, so you go on what we are told by the FBI. If you can go by that, then no, this is not surprising at all to find that they may possibly have set the fire themselves.
Vicki Mabry, we just want to break away from Waco, Texas for just a moment to try to find out a little bit more about how this fire at the Branch Davidian compound that broke out some 45 minutes ago got started. Rita Braver is standing by now in our Washington bureau. Rita, how does the FBI know that this fire was started from inside?
Well, sources are telling me here in Washington that FBI snipers who were perched all around the window and basically had views of almost every window in the compound looked in and actually saw members setting the place on fire, almost a group of them doing it simultaneously while they looked on in horror. I was also told that actually one member of the U.S. law enforcement groups, possibly a member of the FBI's hostage rescue team, which of course has been on the scene here, actually pulled a member of the compound cult out of the burning building. They are not sure at all about what has gone on in terms of the death and devastation inside, and they really don't know if there are any people in those tunnels downstairs who may be saving themselves in some way. But the word that we are hearing here in Washington was that there was no incendiary device set off by the FBI, that this was in fact a fire that was deliberately set by cult members. And they also insist that they had no indication that any kind of suicide attempt like this was planned. You heard the FBI chief on the scene down there earlier today saying that they really were pretty sure that there wasn't a mass suicide contemplated. I think there is going to be a lot of evaluation when all of this is over.
Rita, the fire seemed to happen coincidentally with the last part of the tear gassing operation, as we saw the snout of an M60 tank pointed inside the front door that was injecting more tear gas into what appeared to be an already saturated compound. Is anybody talking about the possibility that this fire was set in conjunction with that tear gassing operation to make it appear as though it was part of the FBI's operation?
No one has suggested that to me, and really what all I have are secondhand reports which have been given to the FBI here in Washington and to others around the city from those on the scene. There are a lot of, as you can imagine, telephone channels being worked between Waco and Washington. You've got to remember that this is this administration's first big law enforcement effort. And earlier today, the Attorney General, the FBI Director were all huddled in the FBI, worried exactly about this kind of disaster, because once you start moving military operations towards civilians, you are going to really be playing with fire, as was the case right here.
Let's go back to Waco, Texas now. Vicki Mabry, firefighting apparatus and emergency crews have been on the scene now for about 5 minutes. There does not appear, though, to be much left to save.
John, the fire at this point looks to be almost completely out. The fire trucks that we saw going in, we can't say for sure that those were the first ones to arrive on the scene. The FBI and the ATF have maintained much closer to the compound a staging area and kind of their headquarters up there. They may have had apparatus on the scene already, but as we talked about, the buildings apparently are so poorly constructed and made of wood that once they're set, it's entirely possible that they would just go up just like tinder. So it's really hard to say.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Vicki, but it appears as though the fire started in the same section of the Branch Davidian compound as the initial ATF assault was carried out on February 28th.
It's very hard to say. I wish I could answer that one. It's very hard to tell inside those windows. What they did that day was surround the entire building. But what happened, the TV reporters and the photographers who were on the scene first were just confined to one particular area, so we really couldn't say that it happened in that particular area. They were completely around that building, firing in on all sides.
Do you have any preliminary reports at this time of how many people have come out of that building?
As you said earlier, we have seen that one person coming out with his hands up, one being dragged away. Still no confirmation, trying to get that for you, on whether the second person being pulled out was an FBI or federal agent, or whether that was a cult member. But so far, no others seen coming outside of the compound.
As Rita Braver told us from our Washington bureau just a few moments ago, she had a report of an FBI agent who had rescued somebody from the Branch Davidian compound. So perhaps that person that we saw being dragged along the ground about 15 minutes ago was a member of the Branch Davidian sect. The president was informed early this morning and had been apprised all along of plans by the FBI to launch this tear gas assault on the compound. Bill Plant is joining us now live from Washington. What is the White House saying at this point, Bill?
Well, John, they are saying that the president was informed by the Attorney General, Janet Reno, of what she and the FBI had decided they wanted to do. And that was the assault with the tanks and the use of tear gas to end the situation. What the White House spokesman will not say is that the president ever gave his affirmative consent. They're simply saying that the president was informed. And when we pressed the White House spokesman to find out whether the president said, go ahead, it's okay with me, we never got an answer. White House spokesman George Stephanopoulos does agree that the president takes responsibility. He said that the president absolutely takes responsibility for all the actions of his government, and that obviously would have to include this. But somehow or other, he has managed to avoid giving Bill Clinton any kind of decision-making power in this instance, simply saying that the president was informed in the early hours of the morning by the Attorney General of what the FBI wished to do. Now, what the FBI wished to do is to move in with its tanks, batter down parts of the building, and put in tear gas. The preparations for that began on the overnight shift last night. Some of us were working there, heard about the movement much earlier in the evening yesterday, and it went on through the night. It was a decision that the White House was aware of, but it's not anything that the president himself personally signed off on, we're told. John?
For about 6 hours, Bill, it appeared as though that operation was going smoothly. Then shortly after 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, as one of the M60 tanks was removing its snout, the one that had the tear gas injector on the end of it, we saw that fire start in the second floor window. We're going to have more from Waco, Texas in just a moment, but if I could, let's turn this special report over to my colleague, Dan Rather.
Thank you very much, Ron. Let's go to Vicki Mabry near Waco. What you're watching are live pictures from near Waco, Texas, where fire is engulfing the religious cult compound. In Washington, it is said that members of the cult set the fire. Vicki, on the basis of what you know and what you've heard there, is there any reason to doubt that the fire was started by members of the cult itself?
Dan, there's absolutely no reason to doubt that. The FBI was very clear this morning in saying what type of non-lethal tear gas they would be firing in, saying they were not using the pyrotechnic type that they could have fired in. And also, if you've listened, as we have over the last 51 days of briefings, they say that David Koresh and his followers have been prepared, that they believed and they were ready for the end of the world. It seems quite likely that if they saw the end of the world coming, the end of the world as they know it coming, and they know that coming out, many of them are going to spend an enormous amount of time in jail. Even if they don't spend time in jail, they are going to be separated. This group was not going to be together as it has been for the past 8 or 9 years. They knew that, so maybe they foresaw that as the end of the world and decided that was not the way they wanted it to be. They may have decided on this type of a suicide pact. It could have been an accident, or truly it could have been a suicide pact. As some of the former members who have come out have said, one girl who I believe is 12 years old, Kiri Jewell, said that she was taught how to put a gun in her mouth in order to kill herself, and that she was told not to put it next to the side of your head because you could survive. So according to former cult members, there was that type of Armageddon suicide kind of mentality going on in there. And if they saw that this is the end of the Branch Davidian group as it has been, they very well may have taken that action.
Vicki, we saw a helicopter again move in over the scene. We know that there are two kinds of helicopters at least operating. One, the larger Chinook kind of helicopter that can carry a lot of people, can lift a lot of equipment. This is a smaller Huey type of helicopter. Emphasizing what we know and what we don't know as we watch this helicopter move into the compound, Vicki, 95 people believed to be inside the compound, possibly as many as 25 children, at least 17 children. Let's recount what we know and what we don't know about the fate of these people. Of the 95, including at least 17 children, what do we know of them?
At this point, what we know is that one person has come out with hands up. Another one apparently has been dragged away. As you were saying, we can see the helicopters. Some of them appear to have landed. Some of them were still hovering very high. The hospitals in the area were put on alert to accept injured cult members, possibly also injured federal agents. They have been on alert. They have known about this operation. The helicopters daily have flown all different kinds of missions, going from the compound, going to the various hospitals in the area, in addition to just flying their regular reconnaissance flight. So it is very possible that they are landing now, perhaps getting people out on the rear of the compound that we are unable to see, perhaps getting some people out on that side, or at least trying to go in. Now that the fire trucks are there, the firemen may be going inside trying to rescue some of those children and some of those cult members.
For those of you who may be joining our CBS News live coverage direct from near Waco, Texas, and the cult compound there, which has been under assault by the FBI and various elements of the U.S. military under the command of the FBI. When you see tanks and helicopters, the FBI does not normally command that kind of armor nor that kind of air. The fire here started shortly after noon. That was moments after an armored vehicle rammed one of the buildings as part of the 6-hour assault. At dawn, FBI agents in an armored vehicle had begun ripping holes in the walls of the compound. Agents were met by heavy gunfire, as reported. No injuries were reported at that time. If there have been any injuries up to now, we're not aware of them. And now you see one of the tanks with that special equipment rigged to it beginning to take another part of the compound off. And then at the other end, yet another, I think. Hard to tell whether it's a different tank or another. All of these pictures from earlier in the day. This is a montage of scenes from earlier in the day, what had happened as the FBI said, in effect, enough is enough after 51 days, and began moving in with the help of the military equipment on hand. Now, shortly after 1 o'clock, these photographs are shortly after 1 o'clock, you begin to see the flames enveloping the compound. We repeat for emphasis the fate of the estimated 95 people inside, including at least 17 children, unknown at this hour. John Roberts, as you watched this develop a little earlier on, as you and Vicki were spearheading our coverage, what were the most impressive things that you saw as this story developed?
Well, Dan, at first, related to this incident that we see on the screen right now, it wasn't clear at this point whether or not the fire was related to the tear gassing operation. Almost immediately after the M60 tank had pulled out, the fire started. We thought initially that the smoke that was rising from the roof line perhaps was tear gas, and we had thought that they're really going after it now. They're really trying to saturate the compound. But I think most impressive is the fact that at how quickly this building went up in flames. It has barely been 50 minutes since the fire started, and already the flames are almost out because there is nothing left to burn. And you really have to wonder when a structure goes out that quickly, and as Vicki Mabry pointed out earlier, this structure was built completely by the hands of the Branch Davidian sect members. You have to really wonder if you did not get out right away, if you would ever get out at all, which really brings into question the fate of what we believe to be 93 people inside, as we have seen 2 people leave the compound.
Now, we emphasize these pictures are on videotape taken not too very long ago, within the hour. Now we're live. As you can see, very little of the compound itself remains. Helicopters on the ground to take out survivors or any injured if need be. We have no reports of anybody injured thus far. You see the array of vehicles, military and otherwise, brought right to the edge of the compound, including a large bus, which you see in the middle foreground. And the helicopters come and go. The smoke hangs like a giant drapery over the whole scene, and the smoldering ruins of the compound, the fate of 95 people, including the cult leader, unknown. Worth mentioning here when you say, why is all this happening? Well, to begin with, 4 federal peace officers died and 16 were injured in the shootout which precipitated this 51-day siege near Waco. Vicki Mabry, there just outside Waco, is the fire being put out or more or less going out of its own accord?
Dan, at this point, it looks like the fire is really pretty much going out of its own accord. We saw the fire vehicles going up, and it was so late. The structure at that point was literally burning itself to the ground and really pretty much burning itself out. So it appears that the fire had just gone on, and the building, being of such poor construction, absolutely was just a tinderbox.
And we see the armored vehicles moving again, maneuvering around the periphery of the compound. As best you can find out, Vicki, what is it that they're now doing?
I was just going to mention that at our best guess, we saw the first fire vehicles come in about 30 minutes after that blaze began. We don't know, as I said before, if there were some up closer to the government staging area, but the first ones that we saw pass us on this road came in about 30 minutes after that, so it's possible that it burned itself out. We do, at this point, Dan, I want to point out, we do have what looks like some ambulances approaching up the road. We can see their lights flashing. At this point, do not hear their sirens, but there are more ambulances headed this way.
And on that, Vicki, let's go to Washington and CBS News correspondent Rita Braver. Rita, any word on survivors?
Well, we are being told here in Washington that there are at least 4 people who are being taken to the burn center in San Antonio, Texas for treatment. Don't have any idea on what condition, whether they're men or women, children or adults. We are told, however, that they are cult members and not law enforcement agents. And right now, what I think most people here are focusing on is how all of this happened. As we mentioned earlier, the word here in Washington is that snipers from both the FBI and the ATF posed all around the compound, looked in, and actually say that they saw the members of the cult simultaneously setting fire to the compound in a lot of places just before the flames erupted.
So we now have these eyewitnesses confirmed saying that they saw members of the compound put the torch to it themselves.
They are the original sources, as I understand it, of this information. And you got to remember, of course, that everything is coming back over the phone wires and the teletype wires to Washington. The Attorney General herself, as well as the head of the FBI, were huddled all morning and have been in and out of the FBI command center all day. ATF officials are monitoring this, and we are getting our information sort of secondhand, but sometimes it's a little easier than the people who are actually on the scene in Waco. This is the word that is being put out here, although I'm sure that there's going to be a huge investigation. I was calling around earlier today to see what the response to this whole event was, and I find that everyone in Washington is being very careful about not second-guessing any of this, but there are already murmurs of big congressional oversight on this.
Well, certainly with the original assault on the compound, that was on February 28th, the assault that began the siege. All kinds of second-guessing has taken place on that, although Lloyd Bentsen, the former senator from Texas, now the Treasury Secretary, under whom the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms operates, said that once the situation had been resolved, he would then have a full investigation. That regarded the February 28th siege, in which 4 federal agents died, 16 were injured in the shootout. Cult leaders have said that 6 of their members were killed in that shootout. Now, we keep emphasizing, because it's important, that we don't know the fate of the people in the compound today. Now, asked why the agents took the action today, the FBI's answer was, and I quote, "Today's action was not a sign that our patience has run out. This was, we believe, the next logical step in a series of actions to bring this to a conclusion," quote unquote, FBI spokesman Bob Ricks.
I know they were saying that, Dan, but you know, around here in Washington earlier in the day, people said to me that one of the things that was really a last straw was this business with David Koresh demanding the word processor. And then I think that Ricks even let a little bit slip out in the news conference today that they said, you know, we had a sense that not even one of those 7 seals that he was writing was actually completed.
Excuse me, Rita, we need to go to Vicki Mabry on scene in Waco as we hear some sirens in the background. Vicki?
Dan, we have more ambulances coming in. This is 2 additional ambulances, which we hope leads us to believe that perhaps there are more who will be saved after this is all sorted out, after this fire is out. Perhaps more have come out. We have seen probably 7 or 8 ambulances going in. And as we've been talking about the children, the 17 children still inside, I'm reminded that the FBI has told us that there are 2, in their words, very pregnant women inside. One of them we know is 17-year-old Aisha Geifus, who is the sister of one cult member who left very early on, Oliver Geifus. Oliver has been in contact with the press from the McLennan County Jail. He has called a number of press people, and he has expressed each time his concern about his sister. But every time we have talked to him, he has also declared his undying and absolute love for David Koresh.
This is CBS News live coverage of the scene near Waco, Texas, when all that remains of the cult compound that has been the center of so much activity, so much concern of the last 51 days, all that remains is burning rubble, smoking ruins, where the 95 people who were reported to be in the compound, where they are, what their condition is, unknown, and it may be unknown for a while. John Roberts, this scene almost unbelievable there on the gently rolling prairie of northern central Texas, where just over 100 years ago, buffalo roamed, Indians encamped, and it was rare to see anyone of European heritage. Today, this, we see, an almost incredible scene
Dan, it's sort of reminiscent as to the pictures that we saw back on February 28th when CBS aired the exclusive coverage of the ATF raid on the Branch Davidian compound. We saw the bullets flying through the windows, the agents ducking for cover, the 4 bodies being carried out. And it seemed as though, as much as the FBI wanted to try to bring this to a non-violent end, it has indeed ended in violence, the violence of an enormous fire that has consumed the entire Branch Davidian compound. We see pictures of people walking out there. We have so far seen pictures of at least 2 people come directly out of the compound. One person walking out with his hands over his head, surrendering to federal agents. Another person being dragged away by a federal agent, believed to be, according to information that Rita Braver gave us from Washington, one of the Branch Davidian cult members. Dan, you were asking earlier about impressions of the way that this entire day has developed. I think one thing that is worth noting is restraint that federal agents used during this tear gassing operation. Upon their first encounter of the Branch Davidian compound just after 7 o'clock this morning, with one of those armored vehicles knocking a hole through the side and trying to inject tear gas into the compound, they were met with a hail of what Special Agent Bob Ricks described of it as at least 75 bullets. Every time federal agents got close to the compound building again, they were met with another hail of bullets and did not fire one shot back, though they did warn the Branch Davidian members that they would be fired upon if they continued this. It's sort of ironic to see this end so quickly after lasting for the past 51 days. And it was also raising questions this morning as we were watching this, that if the FBI was going to go in with the armored vehicles, with the tear gas, try to bring this to a peaceful end over a number of hours during a day, why it didn't take place 40 or 50 days ago.
Questions, nothing but questions, as we look at these live pictures from Waco, Texas. To bring you up to date, fire has engulfed the religious cult compound that was the center of attention near Waco. Shots were fired as the FBI moved in at dawn with U.S. Army armored vehicles. There's been all kinds of helicopter movement. Yes, you saw those people walking in the shot in amidst the smoke of just a few minutes ago. We haven't said who they are because, in fact, we don't know, and there's no way of telling. Were they people out of the compound themselves? Were they federal agents? The honest answer is we simply don't know. That's the situation up to now from near Waco. We're going to sign off our CBS News coverage, Dan Rather with John Roberts and Vicki Mabry near Waco at this time. However, be assured that when and if there are any developments worthy of bringing to air on this story, CBS News and this CBS station will, as we have right the way through, be on the air and bring you up to date. Of course, we'll have full coverage on tonight's CBS Evening News. With John Roberts and Vicki Mabry, for the moment, Dan Rather, CBS News, New York.
This has been a CBS News Special Report.
Report, Dan Rather, CBS News in New York with Vicki Mabry near Waco, Texas, updating you on what's happened today with the siege, the assault and overwhelming of the compound where a cult leader and some 95 followers had been holed up for 51 days after they had killed 4 federal agents. Now, here's what's happened today very quickly. The compound has been burned to the ground. This was after FBI agents moved an armored vehicle in and with several armored vehicles smashed the buildings and then pumped in tear gas. After that, the fire started. The Justice Department said cult members set the fire. The fate of the Branch Davidian so-called leader, David Koresh, and his followers, believed to include 25 children, a number of them under the age of 10, simply is not known. One person was seen jumping off a roof. Another emerged with his hands up. There may be others who've gotten out, but if so, we do not know it. Shortly after noon Eastern Time today, smoke began pouring out of several second-floor windows. Within 10 minutes, one end of the wooden compound was completely engulfed in flames. You see from this videotape taken earlier. The flames then raced all across the building, fed by high winds. The high winds had given federal agents difficulty earlier in the day when they tried to pump tear gas into the complex. Huge clouds of smoke have been rising into the air from the complex of interlocking buildings. A watchtower that had become so familiar in television shots of the siege collapsed during the blaze. The Justice Department said 2 people were seen at the compound starting the fire at opposite ends of the complex. The Justice Department says that members of the cult clearly set the fire. Now, as the afternoon has worn on, the fire burned down, the compound burned completely to the ground. Helicopters began moving in. There was some movement seen around the compound, but we repeat for emphasis the fate of David Koresh and the estimated 95 of his followers who'd been holed up for 51 days unknown. Stay tuned to this CBS station for further details as the afternoon goes along and a complete wrap-up on tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather, CBS News, New York.
This has been a CBS News special report.